live to the U.S. Senate, here on C-SPAN 2.
Let us pray. Eternal God, known to us in countless ways and times, lead our senators in your way. Lord, keep them aware that they can depend on your validation of every just cause and the forgiveness of every sin which they, in godly sorrow, confess to you. As they follow you, may their small successes prompt them to even greater undertaking for human betterment. Guide them by your higher wisdom and bring them to a desired destination with hearts at peace with you. We pray in your holy name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., March 7, 2011, to the Senate. On the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Richard Blumenthal, a senator from the state of Connecticut, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
The Majority Leader.
Following any leader remarks will be a pretty morning business until 4:30 today. Senators will be allowed to speak up for 10 minutes each. At 4:30, the Senate will proceed to executive session with an hour for debate equally divided and controlled in usual form. At 5:30 today, the Senate will confirm by consent the nomination of Sue Myerscough of Illinois to be a U.S. District Judge for the Central District of Illinois. Excuse me. There will then be a series of up to 3 roll call votes. First, on the confirmation of Anthony Battaglia of California to be United States District Judge for the Southern District of California. Confirmation of the nomination of James Shadid of Illinois to be U.S. District Judge for the Central District of Illinois. And a motion to vote cloture in S-23, the American Invents Act. Filing deadline for second-degree amendments to S-23 is 5 p.m. today. In addition, on Friday, cloture was filed on a motion to proceed to H.R. 1, the Defense Appropriations Continuing Resolution. I hope to reach an agreement to vote on H.R. 1 and the Democratic alternative introduced by Senator Inouye on Friday. We will vote on this matter sometime tomorrow, Mr. President, even if it's late tomorrow night. In addition to completing action on the American Invents Act, the Senate will also begin consideration of the continuing resolution, possibly H.R. 4, the repeal of the 1099 section of the bill that we passed last year dealing with health care. Mr. President, budgets and votes have something very important in common. At their heart, both require and reflect tough choices. Tomorrow, we hope the Senate will vote on a Republican response to the President's budget. That's the so-called H.R. 1 that not only the United States now focused on it, but the entire world. And then we'll vote on the Democratic response. Everyone's done the math, and everyone knows how these votes will turn out. Likely neither proposal will pass, which means neither will reach the President's desk as written, and we'll go back to square one and back to the negotiating table. But tomorrow's votes are still significant. Just as our budget, that is, how we invest taxpayer money and invest our resources reflects our values, so will the votes that are cast on these two competing measures. They will show us which senators are serious about fortifying their long-term future and which are more concerned with scoring short-term political points. These votes will show us who wants an easy applause line and who wants to strengthen our nation's bottom line. And as the two parties' vastly different proposals make clear, there's a fine line between a responsible budget and a reckless budget. The Republican plan we'll vote on tomorrow is the same plan the Tea Party already pushed through the House of Representatives. It's called H.R. 1. Now the same Tea Party is trying to push it through the Senate. That plan will cost 700,000 Americans, including 6,000 Nevadans, their jobs. And I won't support that, or will any other Democrat that I know of here in the Senate. The 700,000 is not a figure picked out of the air, Mr. President. Economists generally agree that it's a huge job loss for our country. Led by Mark Zandi, who I've said on this floor on a number of occasions, has a pretty good resume. He's the chief economist at Moody's now. He's a noted economist and was John McCain's chief economic advisor during the campaign. The Tea Party Republicans are hoping America will see their budget price tag and swoon over its cuts. They're hoping the country doesn't look under the hood and see what's wrong. That's because they know that when we do, we'll see their shiny new budget is a lemon. It has a badly broken engine. Mr. President, I can remember I represented a number of car dealers when I practiced law. One of them was a wonderful man. His son is now running his operations. And there was someone out picketing his place of business. And he had a great big lemon. He alleged that he'd bought a car there at Finley Oldsmobile, and it was a lemon. And so I was, as an attorney, wanting to stop that. I was ready to go to court, get an injunction to stop that. And Pete Finley called me and said, look, there's something wrong with that car, and I don't want people to buy cars. There's something wrong with it. Take care of it. We'll get him another car. Well, that's what the Republicans should do with a lemon that they're trying to perpetuate over here. As I said, if you look under that hood of H.R. 1, you find it's not a good piece of legislation, and that is a gross understatement. H.R. 1 has not only a broken engine, it's a lemon in many other respects. To pull ourselves out of the ditch, we need an engine that powers growth, innovation, and our being more competitive. We need one that powers recovery. The last thing we can afford is a broken engine that will drive us right back into recession. You can't fix a broken economy with a broken engine. But that's exactly what the Republican House is trying to sell us with this H.R. 1. The Tea Party plan will make Nevada's students and workers less competitive and will make Nevada's families and communities even less safe. It hurts education, which of course threatens our future. There are many examples, but let me give you two or three. Starting where many of our children start in early education. Head Start is a successful early education program for the poorest of the poor. It's been proven that Head Start students are much more likely than their peers to graduate from high school. But under the Republicans' plan, this Tea Party plan, this H.R. 1, 200,000 Head Start students, including hundreds and hundreds in Nevada, were basically eliminated from the school system. That's a careless, short-term cut with devastating long-term consequences. Second, what about students who are already out of high school and go to college thanks to Pell Grants? If the Republican plan were to pass, those Nevada undergraduates who rely on Pell Grants would see their tuition assistance cut by more than $600 a year. That means one of two things. These student tuition bills will go up, or they'll be forced to drop out. We can't afford this, Mr. President. Either choice is a bad choice. And third, what about those who are already in the workforce, who are looking to join the job market? This Tea Party proposal would cost Nevada $70 million in job training investments. That would hurt about 8,000 potential Nevada workers. These cuts won't do anything to help unemployment go down or help Nevada's economy get back on its feet. We all know we have to make some sacrifices. Mr. President, we know there have to be cuts made, and we've made them. But these Republican cuts, as indicated in H.R. 1, dealing with education alone, I've just mentioned, are counterproductive. If we slice budget in the name of a stronger future but cut the most important way to strengthen our future, what have we really accomplished? Nothing. We've made things much worse. It's not just education. Let's talk about a few more of these dangerous consequences a Republicans' reckless budget would have for Nevada. Mr. President, the same would apply to Connecticut. It would pull the plug on renewable energy jobs in Nevada, including 600 new jobs at the state's largest solar plant. It would fire another 600 Nevadans who work at community health centers. Mr. President, one of the really outstanding things we did in the health care bill, we put $10 billion in that bill to build 10,000 new community health centers across the country. These aren't just for poor people, but they really do help poor people a lot. It gives a place for people to go that doesn't overrun our emergency rooms. All the economists, medical economists, say it would cut down the cost of health care delivery significantly. But that isn't what the Republicans do. The 600 Nevadans who work at community health centers would basically be eliminated, which means fewer Nevadans would have jobs, and the neediest among us would have fewer places to turn when they need help getting healthy. Would cut more than $1.5 million from local law enforcement programs to help Nevada prevent crime, fight domestic violence, keep our neighborhoods safe from gangs. And the plan would cut Homeland Security investments by about $1 million, which puts every Nevadan and everyone who visits Nevada at risk. Some 60 million people a year visit Las Vegas alone. These cuts threaten the health of our economy, our communities, and our citizens. Our plan. Democrats know we cannot make our economy work again for the middle class unless we invest the taxpayers' money as responsibly, efficiently, and transparently as possible. So for anyone to come and say, we don't think there should be cuts, we believe there should be cuts. We've proven that, Mr. President. We've already cut $51 billion below what the President recommended, and that was a pretty austere budget that he recommended. Yes, it's easy to demonize any investments we make by calling it government spending. It's always been a political shortcut to demand that we slice zeros off the end of the national budget. But before we arbitrarily go on a reckless cutting spree, let's think about what these investments do, whom they help, and how much they mean to our future. That's what Democrats have thought about as we drafted our plan. We made responsible cuts to the tune of $51 billion below President Obama's budget. We've made some difficult choices. But where the Republican plan cuts indiscriminately, we've cut carefully. Where the Republican plan is based in ideology, ours is based in reality. Some of the ideological cuts, Mr. President, eliminate public broadcasting, eliminate the National Endowment of Arts, the National Endowment of Humanities, and there's scores of things they've done just cutting indiscriminately. Where the Republicans' plan is based on ideology, ours is based on reality. That's because we know the whole point is to cut in a way that strengthens our economy, not in a way that weakens it. Our cuts eliminate redundancies and necessary bureaucratic programs and stop funding for earmarks. Our plan recognizes that our job isn't to cut $1 billion here and $1 billion there just to say we did. It recognizes, as Democrats do, that we're not in competition to determine who can cut the most without regard for the consequences. Rather, we need to cooperate to figure out where we can cut the smartest. The budget is complex. Our choice is very simple, Mr. President. We want to create jobs. The Senate simply cannot pass the plan the Tea Party has already pushed through the House. If we want to responsibly make the cuts we all agree we have to make, the Senate should pass Democrats' proposal to bring down the deficit and keep our economy moving in the right direction. And if we want to realistically get something done before it's too late, the House and the Senate, Democrats and Republicans, should return to the negotiating table, where we know a good compromise on common grounds awaits us. The country is waiting too, and time is not on our side. Mr. President, would the chair announce morning business?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 4:30 p.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each. The senator from Alabama.
Well, I don't think the 6% reduction in spending proposed by the House is going to cause the United States government to sink into the ocean. States are making far more serious reductions in spending than that. The language our majority leader is using seem like, to me, recalls the old language in 1994, reckless Republican spending cuts and poor people thrown into the streets and that sort of thing. But what happened in 94? In 94, the American people, through their newly elected Congress, balanced the budget in 4 years. They balanced the budget. When people said it couldn't be done, they said that the spending reductions were going to destroy America and growth and prosperity and everyone else that they could imagine, but it didn't happen. It helped create a period of outstanding growth. Tuesday, we are told, we'll have a key vote. It's a very important vote because it deals with the level of spending this country is going to participate in. It's going to make a national decision that's really important. We passed a 2-week continuing resolution that reduced spending by $4 billion over that period, keeping us on track to meet the House-passed goal of a $61 billion reduction in spending this fiscal year. It was a good, small first step, but the big step will be coming up, I suppose, a week from this Friday, when the CR that we just passed will expire and we have to pass another one. At what level will we pass it? Perhaps a microphone would help. At what level would we pass this CR? That's the question that will be before us. Will we continue the trend of reduced spending that the House started us on, that the American people started us on by the election last November, just 4 months ago? Or do we continue business as usual, continue to be in denial, to say no more, no mas, we can't do any more, we give up? Well, a vote for the Democratic plan that will be presented tomorrow will be a vote to do nothing. That's the fact. It will be a vote to say we are still in denial. It will be a vote that says deficits don't matter. We can just continue to spend, just continue to invest. It'll all get better in the end. It is a vote for more investments and more spending. Indeed, we had in the Budget Committee, of which I'm the ranking Republican, last week, testimony from the Department of Education. They're asking for an 11% increase when inflation rate is 2%. The Department of Energy asked for a 9.5% increase. And amazingly, the Department of Transportation came in with a 62% increase in spending. Is this a way to bring this country under control? Is this what the American people expected when they voted last election and sent a new House of Representatives and new senators here? I don't think so. And what do we hear? It will be another vote for fear that we can't reduce spending because the nation will sink into the ocean. I don't think so, and the American people don't think so, and cities and counties and states are facing these same situations and making tough decisions and being successful at it. So the decision we make on spending could well determine the fate of our nation and our economy. It's that important. It really is. 40% of every dollar we spend today is borrowed. We will spend this fiscal year $3.5 trillion, but we only take in $2.2 trillion. Did you know that? Congress knows that. They're in denial some, but that's the fact. It's indisputable. It's in the President's budget. Over the next 10 years, the budget, pursuant to the budget, the plan that the President gave us, interest on the debt will go from $200 billion last year to $844 in 1 year. We will double the entire national debt, the gross debt, from $13 trillion to $26 trillion. They claim they're saving $1 trillion. I guess it would have gone to $27 trillion. How can you save $1 trillion when the deficit's going up every single year? The lowest single year of deficit is $600 billion. The highest single deficit year President Bush had, which was too high, was $450. The lowest they'll have is $600 billion, according to the President's own numbers he sent to us. This is not an acceptable path. We're on the wrong road. This is a road to decline. It's the road to dependence on foreign sources of money to finance our spending spree. It's not the road to prosperity and growth. We simply have to make some tough choices. We have to make this government leaner and more productive. We need to create growth and prosperity. And the growth and prosperity has to be in the private sector. That's who pays the taxes that allows us to continue to have a healthy government. And a failure to act at this point in history, after all the discussion we've had, and the debt commissions, several actually have met, all have called for substantial reductions in spending, but Congress doesn't get it. So this is a demoralizing thing, really, for our people, for our government, for investors in the United States, for business who's sitting on capital and thinking about a sound economy any longer. Is the government of the United States incapable of altering its trajectory? They thought perhaps this election was that way. Well, the House has sent a clear message. Some think it could have gone further. It proposed a $61 billion reduction in the discretionary spending accounts. That's a 6% reduction. We've already gotten 4 off that, so it would be $57 billion. When you take these numbers, Mr. President, and American people, I hope, will think about this. When you reduce the baseline by $61 billion for spending in the discretionary accounts, that is far larger than some people think. One of the things that's gotten us in trouble is the geometrical problem of increasing spending. When you're increasing spending at 7% a year, for example, for 10 years you double the size of government, just like your bank account doubles at 7% interest compounded. But when you're reducing spending, the same thing occurs. $61 billion, a reduction in the baseline. If there were no more reductions over 10 years built into the baseline, would result in about $850 billion in savings. In 10 years, almost $1 trillion. Just a $61 billion cut. It does make a difference. It does make a difference, and it's significant. But President Obama's plan, the Senate Democratic plan, do almost nothing. He proposes, as I understand it, a 6%, $6 billion cut for the rest of the fiscal year. That's just about a 0.5% reduction in spending this fiscal year. And the Senate Democrats' plan appeared to me to be a $4 billion reduction, less than 0.5% reduction in spending this year. Those are fake cuts. They're not real cuts. This is Washington talk. This is why this country is virtually broke. The President says that he proposed a budget to the United States Congress, as law requires him to do, and that budget would cause us to live within our means and to begin paying down the debt. That's what he said. That's what his budget director said in testimony before the committee. What planet are they on? The lowest single annual deficit, and if anybody in this floor wants to dispute this, I'd like to hear it. The lowest single annual deficit is over $600 billion in his 10-year plan. And they're going up in the out years to almost $900 trillion in the 10th year of his 10-year plan. That's why experts tell us this is an unsustainable course. I wish we weren't in this fix. I guess I'll have to take some of the blame, too. I voted against a lot of these spending programs, but I've supported them, and we've gotten ourselves in and we've gotten ourselves in a fix. It's going to be hard to get out of it. Not impossible, but we're going to have to take some action. It cannot be business as usual. Of course not. But that's what the majority leader is proposing, to do nothing. Do nothing. Let the interest on our debt go from $200 billion a year to $844. Where's that money going to come from? The education budget, $60 billion, the highway budget, $40 billion, $844 on interest. What is it going to crowd out that we'd like to spend government money on? And what if we have a debt crisis? This assumes interest rates are at 3.5%. But a lot of people think this interest rate is not so stable. A lot of people are afraid that we could have a national or even international debt crisis. Interest rates could surge. I remember when I bought my first house, the interest rate was double digits. I think it was 11.5%. To think we can't have that happen? And then instead of $844 billion in interest, do we have $1.5 trillion in interest in 10 years? Crowding out all kinds of other spending? This is irresponsible. This is an irresponsible course. Everyone knows it. You can't borrow your way out of debt. So what is going to happen? Let's just pull back the curtain. Let's just talk about what the plans are here. It's pretty clear if you look at it and been around this town a little bit. So the Democratic leader accepted, he didn't want to have any debate, very short order, accepted the $4 billion reduction over the 2-week period last week. That was done. Nobody much talked about it. American people assume things are rolling along pretty well. At least we avoided a government shutdown, and things are moving along pretty well. So now we're going to have another quick vote tomorrow. That was just decided apparently today on 2 different plans. The House plan, a 6% reduction, a Democratic plan, basically no reduction. And then we'll vote. Neither one will pass. And a week from this Friday, the CR, the 2-week CR will expire, and we'll be heading toward a government shutdown. So secret negotiations will begin, and they'll all start talking. Maybe the Vice President will get in there and talk a little bit, and they'll move around, and the special interests will be involved. The American people won't be in on the discussions. They probably won't invite me in on the discussions. I don't know who all will be there, but they'll begin to negotiate and talk, and they'll be seeking some toothless compromise. Crocodile tears and warnings will be shed. Oh, we can't have a government shutdown. We've had a half a dozen for short periods of time, and we certainly don't want one. But that's the way they'll talk about it. So we just can't cut anymore. It's going to end. Schools are going to close. Health care programs are going to close. All of that. You've heard it before. Every state, every city, every county that goes through this has the same political rhetoric out there. You can't do it. It just won't happen. Then they're going to expect, I guess, the Republicans to cave. And the plan, of course, as it's been from the beginning, is business as usual. Business as usual. Politicians win again. People lose. Elections nullified. Business as usual. Well, I don't think so. Business as usual has put us on the road to bankruptcy. And the voters did speak. And there's a moral responsibility of this Congress to respond to the legitimate cries of the American people. Don't we have that responsibility? I know one senator told me that during that election, they ran every single ad they talked about reducing spending and won by a margin far more than anybody predicted. There's no doubt that the American people expect us to reduce spending. They know that there'll be some people won't get as much money as they were getting before, but they know we're spending too much. That's so commonsensical. And a vote for the Democratic proposal truly would be a vote for the status quo. It would be a victory for the status quo. It would be seen clearly as a victory for the big spenders. It will be a continuation of the unsustainable fiscal path that we are on, the path to decline, the path to dependence, debt dependence. The whole world is watching, really. Just like we watched the British, they stepped up to the plate and made cuts. The Germans have criticized the United States for our excessive spending. The European Union has criticized the United States for our excessive spending. Canada has done a lot better than the United States has in containing spending. The world is watching. What is the United States going to do? Is it going to get its house in order like the other developed nations are working to do? Have they made a national decision to reform their unsustainable actions or not? Some say these $61 billion in cuts would hurt growth. I contend that absolutely is not so. In terms of the total government spending, we spend $3,500 billion. $60 billion reduction in that spending total is not going to throw this economy into a recession. Indeed, what it would do would be send a message to the financial world that the American people have gotten it, that the Congress has gotten it, and they're at last beginning to end the unsustainable trajectory that this government is on. The idea that we can borrow money, pay interest on it, and create jobs has not worked. If it were such a good idea, why don't we borrow 3 times as much and spread around 3 times as much money? It's not an economically sustainable theory. It won't work, and it has not worked. So we're facing a huge national decision. And I believe many of my Democratic colleagues get it. They tell me they do. They've said so publicly, many have. But talk is not enough. Action will be needed. We'll begin to take action tomorrow when we cast this vote. Party loyalty is fine. We all have to try to work with our leadership, and nobody complains about that to a degree, but we're not to be lemmings. We do have a duty to our constituents, our country, and our future to make some tough decisions. So for example, I'll just share one more thought, and I'll wrap up. I see my colleague, Senator Roberts, our able senator from Kansas, here. Don't think that we're cutting spending, this 6% reduction, from some tight baseline of spending like may be so in your state, your city, or your county. In the last 2 years, the non-defense discretionary spending has increased 23%. And that does not count the stimulus package money, the $850 billion, the largest expenditure ever in the history of this republic or any other nation in the history of the world. That's on top of the 23% spending. For example, the EPA in 2 years got a 36% increase in baseline spending in 2 years. They can't take a 6% reduction, plus they got an almost 70% increase from the stimulus package, a $7 billion infusion on top of their $10 billion budget. What about the State Department? They got a 132% increase in spending in the last 2 years, plus $1 billion for the stimulus package. And Education Department asked for an 11% increase this year, got an 11% increase previously, and hold your hat, their budget's about $63 billion now. They got $97 billion out of the stimulus package, more than the whole budget. So, Mr. President, we borrow 40 cents out of every dollar we spend. Our debt will soon outgrow our economy. Interest on the debt under the President's budget will rise to $844 billion a year. The question is not whether we are headed for a crisis, but whether we have time to act to prevent it. Our character is tested by how we respond in times of great challenge. This week, the Senate faces such a test. How do we respond to the growing fiscal crisis facing our nation that every expert, including the Debt Commission, has told us is real? This is a defining vote in the career of every senator and a defining vote for the Senate. A 0.5% proposed reduction in spending by this administration is not anything. It's basically doing nothing. We need every group, every concerned citizen to reach out to Congress, to tell Congress to get off this road to fiscal calamity, and to every fellow senator, I say, now is the time to stand and be counted. Are you going to be the vote that helped us turn back from the fiscal cliff, or the vote that pushed the economy that much further toward the edge? I thank the Chair when you yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, I understand we're in morning business and that I'm recognized for 10 minutes. I ask unanimous consent I be recognized for 15 minutes, and I will try to make it short. If it goes on any further, I'll ask unanimous consent for additional time.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'd like to congratulate the Senator from Alabama for laying out exactly what we face when we're going to have a vote here tomorrow in regards to the future of the United States and whether we restore common sense to federal spending and prevent the chaotic situation that he has so aptly described, not only in terms of our immediate future, but for our children and our grandchildren. And I think that says it all in regards to we had a town hall meeting, Senator Jerry Moran, myself, Congressman Kevin Yoder, Johnson County, Kansas, and immediately, first question out of about 150, 200 people, very excited, when are you going to get control of this spending? And worried not only about themselves, but their kids and their grandkids. So I think as usual, we're going to have to dub you the watchdog of the Senate, but you so eloquently described exactly what we face, and I thank you for it, sir. Mr. President, I rise today to talk and speak out against what I consider to be a regulatory assault on our nation's energy sector. That's pretty strong language, but I intend it to be. The Senator from Alabama talked about the amount of money in terms of the increase to the EPA. Well, the reason they need more money is because of all of the regulations they're putting out that have been, as far as I'm concerned, have not met any cost-benefit yardstick and yet pose a real threat to the business community and to everybody concerned. Now, I've listed a number of these proposed regulations in a letter I sent earlier today to President Obama, which I asked to be included in the record, Mr. President.
Without objection.
We've or we, myself, staff, myself, others, a lot of people I've met with in Kansas, regardless of what economic sector we're talking about, whether it is energy, which I want to talk about today, whether it's agriculture, which we talked about last week, health care is coming, and then we're going to talk about the financial sector. And so we've talked about the President's initiative, his executive order, in which the President said rightly, and I applauded that statement, that we have so many regulations pouring out of Washington and so many regulations on the books, and we really don't have a cost-benefit yardstick, that's my favorite term for it, to say, well, does the cost exceed the benefit? Does it make sense? And the President himself said there are many that are duplicative and that are very costly and that basically are stupid. That was exactly what the President said. I said egregious. That's the Senate word. The President said stupid. I think everybody understands that. So he issued an executive order, and he said to all of the agencies, the federal agencies, please take a look at the regulations that are on the books and all the regulations that are coming out of your agency and see if you can make sense out of it and try to separate out the ones that are duplicative, costly, and yes, stupid, and the ones that are not, and then we can make some progress. And I applauded the President's effort. The problem was that it's an executive order that has no teeth. There are three exemptions, and I will get into that into my prepared remarks, but basically the independent agencies are excluded. There's a bunch of them. There's language in the bill that says if you're doing it for the public good, the Secretary can say, oh, well, that doesn't apply to us. How many secretaries do you think around here, or for that matter, czars, I guess they're in the room, I don't know really what they do, but at any rate, if there's a czar and a secretary sitting there talking to Schedule C appointees and saying, do you think our regulations serve the public good? Well, of course people think that. They wouldn't have promulgated them, or they wouldn't have issued them or thought them up to begin with if they didn't think it was public good, so they're exempt. And then we have a wonderful paragraph that I defy anybody to understand that they could also use that in regards to dodging around the President's executive order. So the President has issued an executive order, said some very good things to the American public, but it doesn't have any teeth. I have a bill. We have 30 co-sponsors. And the bill says, Mr. President, you're right with your executive order. We codify his order, but we take out the exemptions. What a day that would produce in regards, or a year for that matter, with all the federal agencies if they really had to adhere to the President's executive order. I hope that we can get more co-sponsors and that we could actually consider it and that we could actually pass it on the floor of the United States Senate. We have several areas of our economy that are affected in a most egregious way by all of these regulations. I talked about agriculture last week. We're talking about energy today. Health care is coming, and the financial institutions will be coming after that. Basically, Mr. President, even as the price of crude continues to climb above $100, and we're talking about energy now and all the regulations, this administration continues to promote domestic energy policies that are making it more expensive for Americans to put gas in their cars, heat their homes, power their businesses. Just yesterday in a town hall meeting in Johnson County in Kansas, I heard complaints about the rising gas prices and our dependence on foreign oil and the need to develop our own domestic resources, all of those resources. But this vital goal is now extremely difficult on the administration's own policies, again affecting not only energy but agriculture and our financial institutions and health care. I call them the four horsemen of regulatory strangulation. That may be a little harsh, but I don't think it is. Mr. President, as I said last week when I came to the floor and highlighted a multitude of new overly burdensome and in many situations absurd EPA regulations that will have a significant negative effect on the ability of our farmers and our ranchers to produce the food and the crops necessary to compete in a global market and to feed a troubled and hungry world. Just take a look at the coverage in regards to Libya and the news blip that we saw on television where somebody was shouting and protesting, and one of our news people stuck a microphone in front of his face and said, are you trying to promote democracy? And he said, no, I just want a loaf of bread. I will say to you that a hungry nation is a nation that does not have any possibility of economic opportunity, and then you get into a lot of problems leading, in fact, to terrorism, and all sorts of bad things happen. Well, unfortunately, as we all know, the EPA's reach goes well beyond the agriculture industry. Its regulations are moving to make the energy we rely on every day more expensive to produce, many times without providing any appreciable benefits to the environment. Now, nobody wants to do anything under the banner of clean air, clean water, or whatever the EPA is promulgating that would endanger the public health. But I think that we can take a good look at some of these regulations, and in regards to any appreciable benefits to the environment, they are few and far between. Since fiscal year 2010, Mr. President, 10 new regulations promulgated by the EPA have accounted for over $23 billion in new costs to the American taxpayer, costs which are even more painful for Americans as our nation continues to struggle with an almost 9% unemployment rate. Unfortunately, with the number of proposed regulations currently before our domestic energy producers, and if we do not take action, we meaning the Congress, 2011 and beyond will be even costlier. Now, for example, EPA has proposed to amend the current national ambient air quality standards for ozone to a range of 60 to 70 parts per billion. Per billion. I think the current standard is 75. They want to lower it down. Every time they lower it down, it gets more stringent. A range so stringent that recent analysis estimates that hundreds of thousands of jobs would be at risk because of city and counties' inability to meet these attainment levels. I remember some years ago, quite a few years ago, I was trying to find out the apparatus that the EPA was using to measure the ambient air quality in Kansas City out by the airport, KCI. And it was during the summertime. And it was hot, and the wind was blowing. The wind blows in Kansas. And I'm sure that the ambient air quality in regards to dust particles and or wherever the wind was blowing over weeds or a certain crop was such that the apparatus that they used would be scoring the level above the ambient air quality standard. Sure enough, it was. And we found it. And it was on a three-legged stool, and it was a canister. Oh, it was about that high. I don't know what was in it. I didn't feel like it was within the purview of an individual congressman at that particular time to go over and take a look at that. But as a result of that, all of a sudden the word came that everybody in the Kansas City metropolitan area could no longer use their lawnmowers. Yeah, lawnmowers. You couldn't mow your lawn. Couldn't start it up, mow your lawn because of that one apparatus out at the Kansas City airport said, whoops, ambient air quality was higher, or was higher than the standard that was proposed. I suppose that was 75 parts per billion. I mean, there's a little bit of something everywhere in everything with the amount of sound science that we use today. But lawnmowers, I mean, people were driving to work, people were farming, the power plants were still operating, but the average person in Kansas City who wanted to use the lawnmower, sorry, couldn't do it. That's ridiculous. The EPA itself has estimated that this new regulation would cost between $19 and $90 billion when fully implemented. I'm talking about the 60 to 70 parts per billion. It provides no rationale as to what new scientific data justifies updating a standard as recently said as 2008. Let's just go back to the 2008 standard. Why on earth are you going to cost people anywhere between $19 and $90 billion when fully implemented? Would you just automatically lower the standard? And you don't have any scientific data that justifies that. This proposed regulation is in addition to recently enacted greenhouse gas regulations requiring application of the best available control technology. Who decides that? Well, that's the Kansas Department of Health and Environment with the EPA looking over their shoulder. And it is the application of best available control technology for stationary sources of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, this regulation currently only affects those stationary sources of energy, the ones that are right there, emitting 75,000 or more tons of carbon per year, and which are already subject to the prevention of significant deterioration. They call them PSDs. I tell you, get into this and start looking at the acronyms. More acronyms you can shake a stick at, but PSD stands for Prevention of Significant Deterioration. Permitting requirements for non-greenhouse gases. They're called GHGs, GUGs. That's the acronym. The other one, well, I won't try to pronounce the other one. Future implementations of this rule could negatively impact millions of small businesses, farms, hospitals, and community organizations with a cost of over $75 billion a year. So we're talking billions and billions and billions in regards to these regulations. According to the Affordable Power Alliance, that's a civil rights organization, by the year 2030, greenhouse gases, with regard to regulations trying to control them, specifically targeting our domestic energy producers, will result in the loss of 2.5 million jobs, and a reduction of household income of $1,200 a year. Now, keep in mind, these are impacts that will have the greatest negative impact on poor households, low-income households, who spend a greater percentage of their monthly income on utilities and groceries, necessities made more expensive to produce and purchase with rising energy prices. In the area of energy recycling, EPA officials are preparing to release a final ruling on regulation of coal combustion byproducts. The acronym for that is CCB, which I hope avoids any classification of this product as a hazardous waste. CCBs are, of course, an unavoidable residual of burning coal to create energy, which I'd like to add is the most cost-effective form of energy available still, and is responsible for providing over 70% of the energy to my state's taxpayers, 70%. Classification of this byproduct as a hazardous waste will restrict further beneficial use of CCBs in a multitude of industries, including agriculture, Portland cement, home construction, and without providing definitive benefits to the environment. In my home state of Kansas, Mr. President, representatives speaking on behalf of a number of Kansas energy producers estimated cost to industry of over $300 billion over the next 5 years to comply with a multitude of proposed EPA regulations dealing with air, water, and CCB management. Again, coal combustion byproducts. $300 billion. That's just, that's unreasonable, and that's probably the mildest thing I can say. These are real numbers that will doubtlessly drive up the cost of energy that Kansans rely on to heat their homes, drive our nation's agriculture industry. Unfortunately, the negative impacts resulting from the multitude of new overly burdensome EPA regulations don't stop with agriculture and energy. Beyond affecting the way people power their homes and businesses, the administration has even moved to regulate what cars can Americans drive. Now, this was made evident by the EPA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's decision last year to begin mandating greater fuel economy and emission standards for all passenger vehicles and light-duty trucks, something that I think a lot of Americans support that. A lot of people in this body support that. Recent analysis, however, has estimated this new regulation will cost the already struggling automobile industry upwards of $10.8 billion to comply, and consumers up to about $1,000 per vehicle in higher purchases prices. They just pass the cost on, so if you're going to buy a new pickup down the road, it's be $1,000 more. Now, while EPA has garnered much of the attention in my state for its efforts to make energy more expensive, From a national perspective, the Department of Interior shares similar responsibility for pursuing policies that not only make energy more expensive, but also makes our country more reliant on foreign and oftentimes unfriendly sources of energy. For example, under the current administration, the Department of Interior has canceled 77 oil development leases granted just a few years ago in Utah that were located within a larger formation covering 3 states that the Bureau of Land Management has estimated contains about 800 billion barrels of oil, more than 3 times the proven reserves in Saudi Arabia. Why? Why would we shut that down when the leases were granted just a few years ago? Not enough environmental oversight. That question has to be asked and answered. 800 billion barrels of oil. No, we can't go do that. This, of course, is in addition to the Gulf of Mexico deepwater drilling moratorium imposed last summer, which had a lasting negative effect on the Gulf Coast economies. The President said, yes, you can go ahead and drill, but the safety regulations are such that a lot of companies that were drilling have left or are leaving. However, foreign competition is drilling in the same place. That just doesn't make sense. Beyond the regulatory burdens, it's also essential we focus on removing redundant programs within the various federal agencies. Listen up. Every upset taxpayer should know this, and more important, demand action from this Congress. Last month, the administration's own Government Accountability Office, the famous or infamous GAO, released a report highlighting hundreds of duplicative programs currently on the books that cost American taxpayers billions of dollars every year. Now, you get into double digits when you're counting the number of programs that all of us would like to depend on and all of us think are important. But they're duplicative. We're doing the same thing. As I say, costing American taxpayers billions of dollars every year. Now, this is separate from the regulatory oversight. This study further amplifies the importance that we must take a serious look at our federal agencies and put in place appropriate oversight, review, and revocation where needed. Mr. President, it is for these reasons that I believe that Congress must move forward with solutions that remove overly burdensome regulations and creates an environment that doesn't hinder energy production and use of those resources that make the most economic sense while still protecting, yes, our clean water, clean air, and do what we can in regards to CO2 emissions. Understanding this, last month I, along with 30 other senators, introduced the bill I was talking about, the Regulatory Responsibility for Our Economy Act. The bill moves to codify and strengthen the President's January 18th executive order that directs agencies within the administration to review, modify, streamline, expand, or repeal those significant regulatory actions that are duplicative, unnecessarily, overly burdensome, or would have significant economic impacts on Americans. That's the President's wordage right there. I agree with it. I applaud the President for saying that. However, I agree in principle with President Obama that we need to take that serious look at both current and proposed federal regulations, but I don't believe his executive order actually does what it purports to do. Too many loopholes, no teeth. Specifically, my bill moves to hold accountable independent agencies which are exempt under his executive order, the FDIC, the SEC, the EPA, that are not covered under President Obama's executive order. The EPA came up and said, well, we're doing the public good, and then they followed that crazy paragraph I'm going to read in just a minute and said, well, we're okay, we're not issuing any regulations that hurt anybody. I just attended the Commodity Classic made up of all farm organizations, all commodity groups out in Great Bend, Kansas. Number one issue, regulations. Why on earth are you putting out all these regulations that are about to put us out of business? And you just go right down the line in any group, any association, any business, all throughout America. Pat, what are you doing strangling us with all these regulations? What are you guys doing? My response is, I'm an us guy. I'm trying to do something about it. Specifically, my bill moves to hold accountable these independent agencies. It also removes from the executive order highly subjective language that directs each agency to use the best available techniques to quantify anticipated and present and future benefits and costs as accurately as possible. Here comes the paragraph that I defy you, Mr. President, I defy any of our highly skilled and educated taking down my words as best she can, anybody in the galleries that I'm not supposed to mention, or anybody. Listen to this. Each agency may consider and discuss qualitatively, this is the way that they look at a regulation to determine whether or not they're going to issue that regulation or not. And they're going to discuss qualitatively values that are difficult or impossible to quantify, including equity, human dignity, fairness, and distributive impacts. That statement is amorphous. It is synonymous with amorphous. I defy anybody to try to determine what that means, except what you want it to mean. So, that statement now wins the Gobbledygook Award of the month. And I think I'm going to come down here every month and award a gobbledygook statement in the regulatory field that are about to drown us all as the gobbledygook statement of the month. And that sure hits it. It doesn't take a legislative scholar to understand that this language creates a loophole large enough to drive a grain truck through and renders the order meaningless. That is why passage of my legislation is so critically important. In closing, I invite my friends on both sides of the aisle, please, to sign on as a co-sponsor of my legislation, realizing the immense opportunities it creates for meaningful review, possible revocation of regulations to counter our nation's growth, along with the GAO report outlawing specific duplication of federal programs, a report that defies PowerPoints or charts, couldn't do it, a maze of too many programs trying to do the same thing. If we don't do this, we're going to cost the business community of America and all Americans billions and billions of dollars and get nothing in return in regards to environmental benefits. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor, and I notice the absence of a quorum.